So my presentation today is about governance at CSU. So in the first meeting we had for the subject, I actually piped up and said that the governance was really like an invisible hand, that it's something that guides, directs and influences our work, but it's more like a force rather than a set objective. And in that way it's a bit mysterious and a bit unknown, and it exists but isn't necessarily present in our day-to-day functions. And I have to admit that I came into the subject with some fairly strong preconceptions about governance. That governance was really about rules, rules were about compliance, compliance was about bureaucracy, which led to regulation, and those things kind of tended to lead to delays in actually getting things done. But I think I changed my attitudes a little bit when Nick presented to the group, and the idea of governance started to become a bit more clear in the sense that it was much more about achievement rather than compliance, that it was really about setting up the systems to get things done. So in the kind of dialogue about governance, I tried to come up with an analogy, and a lot of the readings talked about steering and direction, and the boat kind of emerged out of that. But I really started to wonder whether governance was really about the direction. Was it about the wind? Was it about the rudder and that function of steering? Or was it the wheel that we use to steer with? Or is it really something a little bit more subtle and something like the keel, which actually keeps things balanced? Working in the standards-based fields like graphic design and web design, there are a lot of parallels between standards and governance. And I think essentially it's about finding an edge to work against. They provide some kind of fundamental ways that we can form a community, and that community can then share and improve and work together. They really provide a common language for discussion and collaboration. And a simple kind of analogy is the idea of a paintbrush, paint and canvas. These are the standards that we use to paint with. And they don't stymie creativity or whitewash the individual. They simply provide a context in which art can be formed, and that they're the tools and implements to exchange ideas and challenge our practices. And so I think standards and governance kind of share those same kind of things in common. But in the readings about corporate governance, I can't actually see that there's anything wrong with the concept, but when it comes to applying it to university, there seems to be some quite strong deficiencies in that. There's too much focus on concepts like directed and controlled efficiency and profitability, which don't really apply to universities because in essence, education isn't corporate. The underlying mission of education is not profit. And I found that there was, very few references to concepts like service or community, which is really what education is for. It's a service to the community, and that's actually enshrined within the Act itself. The other thing that I kind of noticed in this was that governance was really framed around hierarchy, which in a lot of ways actually seemed to divorce the function of governance from the actual business, in a sense that management is an entity within the organisation rather than a function of it. And it really started to kind of pick up that maybe this explains the failings and misunderstandings about governance and why corporate governance has really been a struggle. I really liked Kennedy's quote from Sir Arbuthnot about top-down kind of hierarchy, that it's not actually necessarily desirable or workable in a university. And I think simply that hierarchy actually has an effect on autonomy, freedom, community and creativity, which are really the core functions of an organisation like a university. But I also started to wonder that a lot of the kind of phrasing of governance was really about dichotomies, that it was the board versus the shareholders and management versus staff. And there wasn't a lot about community. But community is really an inclusive term, but it's also something really important to the university because it's actually what we're all about. It's key to our act in the sense that it's actually saying that we are a service to our community. But it's also quite an important component of CSU's overall strategy about where we see ourselves and how we see ourselves functioning. So for me, in my work about innovation, I'm starting to get the sense that governance itself doesn't prevent innovation. I think it can impact on it and the speed in which it can actually occur and what can actually occur, but it's not something that prevents innovation. But I'm also kind of interested in the concept that there's actually opportunities for innovation in governance. So rather than being depending on representative processes, that digital technologies could open up more direct interaction across the organisation. That technology could enable initiatives like crowdsourcing and for CSU to actually really harness the distributed knowledge that's inherent within the organisation, to actually kind of use it as a force to drive change and affect the overall kind of management and direction of the university. So I think the governance has been a really interesting theme and an interesting topic, and I'm looking forward to kind of exploring it in a little bit more depth.